Thank you. Yang Yichen. He joined the Department of Electrical Engineering at National Taiwan University in 1988, and from 2009 to 2012, he was appointed as the Distinguished Professor of the Department and also Deputy Dean of the College of Electronic Engineering and Computer Science. Later, he was on secondment, being the president of the National Applied Research Laboratories, most 2012 to 2013. And then afterwards, he came back to be the executive vice president for academics and research until 2016, when he was again on secondment to be the political deputy minister of the Ministry of Education in Taiwan. 1 year later, he was reassigned as the minister of MOST. He was elected as an IEEE Fellow in 2001 due to his outstanding contributions to algorithm and architecture design on video coding systems. And in 2009, he was awarded TWAS prizes and national professorship from the Ministry of Environment of Taiwan. His research interests are DSP-IC design, he'll have to tell us more about that, video signal processing, and biosignal processing. And although he has the expertise on electrical engineering, he knows science and technology to jointly serve the sustainable development of the human society. So he therefore offers the best support for the researchers in sustainability science and related international initiatives, including the participation of MOST with Belmont Forum. So please give a warm welcome to Minister Dr. Yang Yichen.
Thank you for the introduction. Our co-chair, Dr. Kate Hummer, and Dr. Maria Uller, Executive Director, Dr. Erika Key, and all Belmont Forum members and partners, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Ministry of Science and Technology, it's our pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to come to Taiwan to participate in the 10th anniversary event that makes a new milestone in the Belmont Forum history. A decade ago, the Belmont Forum established as a partnership of founding organizations at Belmont House in the United States. Forum aims to take in international transdisciplinary research, collaborative research actions called the CIA, to provide knowledge for understanding, mitigating, and adapting to global environmental challenges. Over 10 years, Belmont members has 28 founding agents from 6, continuing working together as an engine to drive scientific research toward actions. Through a variety of CIA's 99 proposals has been awarded, in which over 1,000 scientists and stakeholders have been worked together. Ministry of Science and Technology Taiwan is very proud of being one of the members of this important global network. MOST Taiwan, we promise, will continue to work with all members and partners to promote the Belmont Forum family, Belmont Challenge, and CRS. As we all know, climate change has been discussed and recognized over more than 2 decades since the UNFCCC addressed the climate change problem in 1992. According to the Act 5 of the IPCC, it is no doubt that the main reason to cause climate change is human activities. It is still not too late to control the situation of getting worse on our living environments. If the entire world agrees to devote efforts on the decarbonization, Last month, in the UN Climate Action Summit in September 2019, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for emergent action to start increase in emission in 2020 and dramatically reduce emission to reach net zero emission by mid-century, this means 2050. There were 66 countries already committed to take this pathway of control greenhouse gas emission and increase global adaptation actions. I and Taiwan will second this proposal and hope all of us can work together to protect our Mother Earth. In 2015, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, called the SDGs, were adopted by the United Nations, which are an attempt to end all forms of poverty, improve health, education, food security, and energy, tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, and at the same time, meanwhile, maintain sustainable growth in the economy. The Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future of all. All global citizens should fully support related missions. In conclusion, environmental and social challenges have no geopolitical boundaries. Solutions for global environmental challenges and sustainable development require a robust and proactive international partnership to improve human well-being. Belmont Forum plays a very important key role to stimulate and get together all the researchers together. I wish this event can have a great success and wish all delegates has a very most enjoyable time during your stay in Taipei. Finally, happy 10th anniversary Belmont Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. At this time, we're going to take a group photo, but we can remain seated. Minister. Actually, we could kind of fill in the gaps. We don't need to move too far. Just kind of scoot your way towards the center. That would be very helpful.
So many of you will have been interviewed in the past few months and may still yet be interviewed in the coming months for the 10th anniversary. We have put together, actually Judith has put together, and we want to thank her very much for her skills in doing this, a couple of movies. And so you might see yourself in there. And if you don't see yourself yet, you will, because more videos are being made and will be posted on Twitter and our YouTube channel. So we want to give you the teaser trailer first, and then we'll give you the short video before we introduce Maria's talk. So just queuing this up. So that was just the teaser, not the real thing.
Belmont Forum is an international network of research funders.
National funding agencies that have come together over the past 10 years to create opportunities for international research collaboration in the field of global environmental change using what we would call a transdisciplinary approach.
7:30, I would say. I started at the first team.
To host a workshop where we would discuss the state of the international research and development fields and invite the key leadership from the top 12 or 15 countries engaged in this kind of research to an event at the Belmont House. That's why it's called the Belmont Forum.
So the idea is for us to rehab strategy of the funders about climate change.
The motivation was to get moving.
Unfortunately, prior to the Belmont Forum, I think there were very few funding mechanisms that allow people to tackle international studies.
Shared pre-reading materials, and it was obvious, and it was a little bit of a jaw-dropper actually, how consistent and complementary the various plans were around the world in these various countries.
The Belmont Forum is an experiment. It's, I think, a really necessary experiment.
We learned that there was a hole in the ozone layer, and how did we determine what we could do to fix it? Well, it took an international effort.
these agencies are committed to cooperative science. They recognize the need for cooperative research and the power of being able to leverage shared resources.
I think the success is based on the fact that funding agencies are operating on very pragmatic terms, that they try to create a common environment according to their own terms, references, their own rules, but joining forces on an international level. It offers one single entry point to many countries internationally. This takes a lot of effort if you need to do it one by one. So having one entry point that brings together like-minded research funders is really an asset.
One of the most critical elements in changing the structure of science so it has a greater impact on the decisions made by other sectors of society.
What the Belmont Forum is aspiring for is the right thing. It's about working across the disciplines. It's about trying to break down boundaries.
The Belmont Forum has every opportunity to make an incredible impact on the lives of the citizens of this world.
And so really we need that transdisciplinary approach if we're actually going to achieve the outcomes that we want to achieve.
Transdisciplinary science is a fantastic way of getting basic knowledge or research that we've been funding for forever to decision making, including local farmers to national governments or anywhere in
people who work in business, people, policymakers, governments, non-government organisations, the people that are really going to take the research outputs forward or to ensure that any research outputs fit purpose.
I would say over the past 10 years, the Belmont Forum really has proven to me that there is an appetite for international, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research for decision making.
As they are moving forward, pursuing the goals that are ahead of them, have been already placed into motion, it will only be a benefit to our community for that work.
International Science Summits always happens. I think the Belmont Forum is ideally positioned to fund those initiatives that are of most significance to our global society.
I'm just delighted to see the successes it's had in subsequent years.
Happy birthday, Belmont Forum.
Happy birthday, Belmont Forum.
Happy birthday, Belmont Forum. May there be many more.
Thank you for that. Good to see ourselves up there a little bit, see where we come from, see our younger selves a little bit too. So we're moving into the program now with a special talk to frame us, give us a bit of history of those early beginnings with ICFA and where we've come for 10 years. And so I'd like to welcome to the stage now Maria Yule, our current, one of our current co-chairs, so that she can share that knowledge with us.
Thank you, Erica. This is a fantastic pleasure for me to be able to do this. I think, Patrick, I think you are the longest standing member still active. And behind that, it's Reynaldo and myself. So there's a few of us that have been around for a while. But the more important thing are the new people and the growth of Belmont. And what I'm hoping to show you is exactly that history. So let's just start. So in the beginning, there was ICFA. And ICFA was the International Group of Funding Agencies for Global Change Research. So they, for many years, were a way to have the international funders come together to talk about schemes and processes to support global environmental change research. And they were very, I would say, powerful in helping to support the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, so the acronym soup of global change programs that have now moved into what we call Future Earth. IGFA started in the 90s, and it wasn't until about 2009 that several of the groups, so Tim Killeen at that time was the Assistant Director for Geosciences at NSF, and his counterpart, Alan Thorpe, was the, let me get this right, the Chief Executive of NERC at the time. And they got together and thought, well, we've been talking about this kind of thing and the movement and coordination and talking about aligning things. I wonder if we can try and move this needle a little bit further. And so in 2009, they met at Belmont House in Maryland. So this is the reason why we're the Belmont Forum. And the group there, they had invited a couple of the larger organizations that were funding global environmental change research at the time. So Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and Japan all met here. And they shared their strategic plans. And as you saw in the video, Tim said this was really shocking that we were all looking to do the same thing. So this really was the impetus for bringing everybody together to say, okay, let's, now that we all know we want to work on the same thing, how do we do this? And this is really where we wanted to stimulate the group to come together and figure out a way to do this in a much more strategic manner. And so it began with identifying the Belmont Challenge. At that time, we were delivering knowledge needed for action to mitigate and adapt to detrimental environmental change and extreme hazardous events. So we had created a white paper that looked at all of the necessary things that were required in order for us to be able to do this. At that time, in 2010, we enticed a few more people in. We increased our membership. We also became, at that time, the Council of Principals for IGFA. So IGFA had a lot of the smaller, I guess, countries, and we had brought them together to talk about how can we move this needle forward in supporting research for global environmental change. At the same time, the International Council for Science, ICSI, was going through its visioning process. And they were looking at what is the next evolution of the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, WCRP. We were looking at the whole acronym, IHDP, and Diversitas. And so that whole process was going on at that time. And we decided that our goals were very similar to what ICSU was doing, so we decided to join forces. And at that point, we asked ICSU to come up with a report on how we can actually, what is it going to take to meet the Belmont Challenge? And that was the report that they put out for us. When we joined forces, we became the Alliance. What we did there was we recognized that it was really important to have not only the funders, but the operational service providers. We needed the research community, and we needed users or stakeholders to come together to really think about how this whole enterprise should be working. And we came up with the idea to launch what we would call a research system for global sustainability. And we had a transition team, and there was a lot of discussions about what we could do with all of this. And really what ended up happening at that point is now we have Future Earth. So Belmont was part of the rollout of Future Earth. We worked with our partners to do that. So that was kind of where we were and what we were thinking in 2010. So we were looking to change the landscape, to create community, and to bring in the partners that we needed in order to do that. But really, we're funders. And what do? We fund research. So we thought, well, we better put our money where our mouth is, literally. And we began doing what we call collaborative research actions. So between 2011 and 2012, we said, is there a way for us to support multinational consortia to research global environmental change challenges in a very easy mechanism? Well, at the time, the G8 heads of research councils had kind of done this. And so we partnered with them to do our first call on coastal vulnerability and freshwater security. But instead of just putting out a call, we decided it would be really important for us to have input from all of the different people that wanted to be sitting at this table. So that's where we started our scoping workshops. So the first two scoping workshops were actually in London and Paris over a weekend, actually. And we came out with the call text for that. And so in 2012, we launched our very first call on coastal vulnerability and freshwater security. And over the next several years, we ramped that up. The next year we did food security and land use change. We did an e-infrastructure and data management, and that's not necessarily a CRA so much, but that was a community building group that was going to help us understand how and what to do with our data. In 2014, we did biodiversity and ecosystem services in a networking approach. We realized that not every time we go to do something, the community is absolutely ready to go. We're asking a lot. We're asking them to have natural scientists, social scientists, and stakeholders. And that is not an easy thing to do. So we needed the mechanisms to do that. So networking became one of our, one of the tools in our toolbox. Arctic, we launched that the same year. The following year, we did climate predictability and mountains of sentinels of change. In 2015, that was our very first foray, and the food security in 2013, it was our first foray into working with the joint programming initiatives. So there are already some groups that were together, and we said, why reinvent the wheel? Let's just work together. So we worked with other groups and proved to ourselves that our mechanism was flexible enough for ourselves, but also to have others come and join us. So in 2016, we did transformations to sustainability, we did food, water, energy nexus, then we started doing about 2 a year. But over these times, this is where we started to increase many new partners. This is where we also benefited from the European Commission having the AeroNet mechanism involved in this, which was going to help us create these partnerships much more easily. In 2018, this is what's on the table now: disaster risk reduction, resilience, climate, environment, and health, ocean sustainability, and Arctic 2. So we went a little crazy in 2018 and rolled out 4. So we're picking up. You can see the momentum. So during all of that time, other than the CRAs, we are also doing this. We merged, IFA and Belmont Forum merged during this time. We adopted the Belmont Forum Open Data Policy and Principles. We finally said this is also crazy, we need a professional secretariat. So we hired Erica, and ANR was our first part of to host our secretariat. It's now in Uruguay as the second tranche of that. We ended up developing a proposal portal to bring in our proposals there. We overhauled our website. We updated our white paper. So now we're understanding, mitigating, and adapting to global environmental change. We added a boatload of new members. We started to valorize, and yes, that is a word, and Erica made it up. We had workshops. We did kickoff meetings. We began coordination of projects. We developed metrics and evaluation, and now we're undergoing a review. So really, through all of that time, the big thing that we've done is streamlined the way we work, but the most important thing we did was build our community. And 2019 and beyond, well, if you go to the plenary, there's going to be lots of discussion about where we're going and the beyond. But right now we have 3 CRAs that we're rolling out in 2019 in pathways to SDGs, food systems, and the restoration of soils and groundwater. So the main thing that I want you to look at, you're not going to be able to read this, and you don't have to read this. But what I want you to notice is that here are the CRAs, okay, that we've done. This is all of the activities that we've accomplished since 2012. So not bad. So to get into some stats, so what do we look like now? We started with a very small group at Belmont House in Maryland. We're now up to 29 members, representing over 50 countries. And this is done in 10 years. We've had 17 collaborative research actions, more than 100 million euros awarded to over 100 projects, including the IDM. We've partnered with more than 150 resource organizations, and we've engaged more than 1,000 participants in over 62 countries. So really what we've done is we've built this community. We've exploded this community. The lessons that we've learned is that we are at the forefront of international collaborative research. And in my opinion, we've put international transdisciplinary research on the map. This is a direct quote from one of our projects from food security. The climate. And Carolina Vera here basically was stating that she's now doing science differently because of Belmont Forum and the way that we help that community engage in transdisciplinary research. And this is getting coverage in Nature and all of the things. So really what we've done is developed a legacy of learning, living, and leadership. Our projects are by far the biggest contribution that we have. They've enabled technology transfer, developed decision-making tools, developed frameworks for rapid response. We've done lots of regional work. So we have many projects that now focus on different regions. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are lots of different examples of Belmont Forum really starting to unite the research capacity in all of the different areas. And this isn't just in one north-south, it's south-south, it's all over the place. So in terms of Africa, we've had quite a bit. I think the best examples here are helping us to leverage local knowledge. So that has really been a forefront. We are at the forefront of developing and incorporating local knowledge into what our projects are doing. From the Arctic, again, we're working with indigenous communities. Lots of different things here going on in terms of governance. So we're really starting to see the natural and the social sciences come together. Asia Pacific region, all of the funded CRAs have had support from the Asia Pacific organizations, and you can see the stats here for this particular region. So Eric has been able to put this together for us as well. But we do have room to grow. I think one of the challenges that we have and what I'd like to see us move forward with is ways to actually better incorporate low to middle income countries, small island developing states, small economies, however you want to put this together. But I think we need to really think about ways to move that needle. So that's kind of a challenge for the next 10 years. So the thing that we are doing now into the next couple of years, SRI 2020, is a big experiment. As Josh said in before, Belmont Forum is an experiment, but this is going to be the very first international sustainability congress that will focus on transdisciplinary approach. We have the hosts of the SRI 2020 from Brisbane, Australia here. It's in partnership with Future Earth. So that is another outgrowth of our 10 years of coming together, is that we're starting to build lots of different, I would say, partnerships that are really adding a lot of value. So that's where we are. And I just wanted to leave you with the notion that I think what we have accomplished over the past 10 years is pretty amazing. We've gone from talking about aligning potential calls for proposals to actually changing and influencing the international funding landscape. So I think Belmont Forum can really, pat ourselves on the back, give ourselves a standing ovation. I think we've come a long way, and yet we do have a lot more to do. Thank you. Any of the statistics are wrong? No, it's not, because I went through all of my stuff. It's my record. All right.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for that trip down memory lane and inspiring us where we need to aspire to, where we need to grow. We're now going to move into the interactive part of our event. And I'd like to ask that the chairs be set up for the first panel. And our panelists include Robert Lee from the University of Reading in the UK, who is one of our project awardees. Marcela Ojeda from the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. Jean Ometo from the National Institute for Space Research. Tiana O'Donnell from Future Earth Australia. Gansen Pillay from the National Research Foundation in South Africa, and Atsuko Sugimoto from Hokkaido University. That's great. So please come and take a chair on the stage. Do I have one? In any order you like. I don't get a chair, so that's okay. Please. Okay, I'm going to keep my comments short because I think we really want to hear from the panelists. And they represent a variety of expertise and experience with Belmont or in informing Belmont about where we can go regarding bridging knowledge systems here, how to connect diverse expertise into transdisciplinary efforts. So within Belmont Forum, we started with the definition of transdisciplinary as the co-development and co-implementation of projects that brought together knowledge from the natural sciences, the social sciences and humanities, and then a stakeholder. And the stakeholder bit was left quite broad to allow a lot of different knowledge types to emerge. We've since grown a bit in that definition. We've recently held a climate, environment, and health call, so weaving health knowledge into that structure. But this is a minimum. It's not a limitation. We do want to encourage other knowledge streams to come forward in engineering, in computer science and information science, in manufacturing and technology. So it's a basic framework. There are a lot of definitions of transdisciplinary out there, but this is the example method of defining transdisciplinary that we've used to scope our activity. So I'd like to actually, we have a few presenters with slides. So I'd like to turn it over first to Robert as an early career representative on this panel. And you have a mic or, no? And if you'd like to come to the podium to do your slides. You're not listening. You're good.
Okay, so I'll give a brief background about myself to introduce myself. So my name is Robert Lee, and I'm from the National Centre for Atmospheric Science in the UK, which is based at the University of Reading. So for my undergraduate, I studied meteorology at Reading and in Oklahoma. Then for my PhD, I was also at Reading, and I graduated in 2015. Since then, I've been a postdoctoral research scientist for 4 years, and now I'm funded, or I'm a Belmont Forum awardee, as Erica said, and my project is called Interdeck, and this was under the 2015 joint pool with JP at Emmett, and so I've been working on that since 2017. And so in my project, in Interdeck, we consist of researchers from Japan, Germany, Norway, Sweden, China, and the UK. And we cover expertise in atmospheric science and oceanography. So a bit of, now just discuss about my own research expertise and interests. My expertise are in atmospheric and climate dynamics, and I'm mostly looking at equatorial regions and extratropical regions, in particular North Atlantic and Europe, and the pathways between them. On time scales, so the call is about predictability, and so I'm looking at time scales on sub-seasonal time scales, which is like 10 to 30 days, and I've also been looking at climate time scales as well. One of the best ways to look at this on sub-seasonal timescales for North Atlantic and Europe is to use weather regimes, which is the kind of broad averaging of the weather into kind of large-scale patterns. And so, I've got a poster outside which explains it in more detail, but essentially there are 4 patterns here. And so then you can get many other applications for this. So I've, on my postdoc, detailed 2 applications which include health, so investigating hospital admissions and mortality, very different weather regimes, and we've also been looking at renewable energy, so how weather regimes influence the energy demand, production and shortfall. And we've also been looking at fundamental climate dynamics as well to try and improve the predictability of weather regimes in sub-seasonal forecast models. So then finally, to bring it back to the panel discussion, I've just outlined some thoughts that I had on what on some opportunities to increase transdisciplinarity based on my experience in this project. So I found that that having funding to go to, for example, project meetings has helped. So we had a midterm meeting in Japan, which was last year, and from that then I met other Belmont Forum awardees, and that led to the energy research project that I just discussed, and so that was with some other Belmont Forum projects. So not only are we working within my Belmont Forum projects, but we're also working with other projects from Rising Cool Year. Finally, so next, another way that we also sort of communicate and learn from each other is with Twitter. So we find that a lot of younger researchers who are on Twitter, we will just discuss with each other and keep up to date on each other's research for Twitter. So I find that is also a good way to be more interdisciplinary, because you get people summarize things in quite a simple way for a diverse audience. And so with this kind of message, then I find that's an easy way to learn from others and see how your own research might be fitting with their research. And so another mechanism is to have funding for scientists to visit other institutions. We didn't have any money for that in our project, but there are other sources of funding, and I think that is also another way. So on the other project, we also had some funding to bring people to Reading, and that's also helped. Another way is to publish in open access journals, and I guess that's one of the Belmont Forum's criteria anyway. But this means that your research is able to be read by more people, and so then that also increases the transdisciplinarity, save other people in other places to have access to the journals other ways because they're different topics. And finally, time within projects to learn about more diverse other topics and attend more diverse meetings. That's also another way that we find increases the transdisciplinary natures, because you have more time to see how your research might be fitting in with other people's research as well. So yeah, we can discuss more, but there's my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt. I think we've stolen your chair. We're playing little, musical chairs over here. Okay. We'll figure this out. It's an experiment. So it's wonderful. It's great to hear that the Japan meeting, which was during the SPARC General Assembly for the climate projects, was able to spur a new idea and collaboration there. I want to give a chance for everybody to present, and then we're going to have some questions and interaction. So Marcella, you will be next.
Thank you, Erica. My name is Marcela Ojeda. I work for the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. We are very happy to be here to celebrate 10 years of the Belmont Forum, and very pleased to host the Belmont Forum Secretariat in Uruguay. For those of you who are not familiar with the IAI, since we are from the Americas, the IAI is an intergovernmental organization. Oops, sorry. There we go. We were established in the year 1992 by 19 countries of the Americas, and our mission is to support global environmental change research, build capacity building in the region, and also provide the best scientific information available to support and guide decision making. We have many mechanisms to doing that to achieve the goal, mainly our science program and capacity building. Science for Policy is cross-cutting to everything that we do. And we're also part of a multilateral environmental agreement and organization. So we work with a number of different partners, national partners, international partners. We're trying to reach out to the private sector and to the civil society as well. So that is not easy, as we've been discussing transdisciplinarity and how to engage with different knowledge systems and communities. I just want to give two examples in terms of TD approaches. One is from our capacity building program and the other one from our science program. And basically the overarching goal of capacity building for the III is to train future leaders in science, in policy, and in science policy management. I'd like to announce that next year we are going to be launching one of our innovative programs, which is modeled after the successful AAAS Science Policy Technology Fellowships. We are partnered with AAAS and also with MITEX Canada. We want to extend that opportunity of training future science advisors, especially in Latin American countries. This is a new concept, and we hope that they will actually be able to be the brokers of the science and the policy to support decision-making through environmental change. Also, our experience with interdisciplinary and transdisciplinarity research has been going on for over 25 years. In the early 90s, we started mainly with funding national scientists working global change. After that, we tried to incorporate and promote more collaborations with social scientists and human scientists, and it's been evolving. So for over 2 decades, the III has been supporting and encouraging more of interdisciplinarity, and over the past 15 years, focusing more on transdisciplinarity research and capacity building. I also like to share with you a new training professional development seminar that we are planning to hold in 2020 to address climate, environment, and health. And we'd like to link that one with the Belmont Forum CRA. So we're hoping to be able to support the development of early career and mid-career scientists with policy decision makers working in the interface of climate, environment, and health to be able to participate in the Belmont Forum CRA. This is just one image of one of our capacity building programs. Since 2005, we've been associating training events, a week or 2 week long training workshops with development of seed grant projects. Basically, what we're trying to do is to bring together early career scientists with policy decision makers coming from the public government, private sector, civil society, not only to share scientific information about different global change phenomena and their impacts on productive sectors in our society, but also encourage them to work together to establish a dialogue. Usually they don't have the opportunity of meeting very often to discuss from their backgrounds and expertise. If they're coming from the public government, if they're coming from the private sector or different areas of scientific knowledge, to be able to talk and understand each other's vocabulary, methods of working, expertise. And not only that, but also being able to identify common areas of interest. And once this is done, how can we work together? So the whole process of co-design starts at the training workshop. Identifying who you can work with, different scientific expertise areas, different sectors, different practitioner areas and backgrounds, different lessons learned, whether you are a practitioner, a policymaker, a decision maker, or a scientist. So they're tasked with the goal of establishing a research team, a science and policy research team. Requirements are different areas of scientific knowledge, different areas of policy decision making that have to be part of the team. And we encourage them to co-design a policy-relevant problem with a TD approach. And that takes place within a week or 2 weeks' time, some virtual training going on at the same time when they're not physically together. And since 2005, we had 3 iterations of this program, funding about 30 seed grants at the level of 10 to 25,000 US dollars. So it's not a lot of money, but it has had a huge impact, especially in training early career scientists with policy decision makers and how to do co-design, how to do GED approaches. So it's really a learn by doing approach. It's a laboratory that they have the freedom to experiment, not only establishing the dialogue with different professionals that are not used to working together, but also especially in terms of developing a collaborative environment. How can they learn from each other, how they can bring their own expertise and experience to the table and be able to work together. So you can see that we had 7 training workshops in different countries. We tried to go to small countries that usually have not participating a lot in the science programs. We have been inviting, selecting people from different countries, background sectors. The II investment has been very little, not only in terms of funding the training workshops, but also the seed grant projects that come out of the training workshops, and also the amount that the teams have been able to leverage to co-fund the projects have been immense and producing various science, but also policy outputs. Just another example, that was the last iteration that we had, 2016, 2017. The only difference that this round, we didn't fund, we didn't support the seed grants. They were supposed to go out for the funding themselves. And one of the 4 projects that were established at the training workshop was able to get funding from the private sector, which was also interesting because the TD approach in this water governance project was available to a company that is actually supporting this research. So it was another kind of experiment that we're not funding, but we are giving them the training to develop a proposal, a TD project proposal that will be useful to a specific user, to a specific sector, and there was another experiment. Another lesson learned here is that 2 of the teams of the 4, they were able to compete for the IAI next round of science programs, which is my last slide. And also in terms not only the capacity building, but together and combined with the science programs, in this case is a small grant program. The last time that we launched this program, which was last year, we basically invited transdisciplinary teams to submit research proposal to the IAI. We did it in 2 phases, one which was a pre-proposal phase where we invited 10 teams of 100 that submitted pre-proposals to participate in an online virtual training where we had 8 modules to be able to give them a lot of the concepts and methods and experiences in developing TD proposals. And one of the requirements was that not only scientists were supposed to take this training, virtual training, but also they had to bring their stakeholder partners to participate in the training. So it's actually not only the theory of how to engage, but also the practical view from the very early stages. How do you engage with your stakeholder, whoever they are, governments, private sector, civil society representatives, NGOs. But the important thing is the science policy interface that has to take place from day one and throughout development of the project proposal development and implementation. So 5-day workshop, virtual training with 8 modules, a lot of discussion about how the communities would work together and how to navigate between the differences of languages, methods, concepts, and so forth. Interesting that 6 teams that ended up being funded after a peer review process. We are funding them now. They started this year at a level of $200,000 for each project for 2 years. 2 of them came from the seed grant program that I presented earlier. So we can also see a value of how the IITD training has been able to succeed into allowing them to participate later on in the small grants with the intermediary type of proposals and projects that the II funds to the next round, which are collaborative research networks for 5 years. So this is just to share a little bit of our experience with you in terms of designing innovative science and also capacity building programs that would allow these different communities and knowledge systems to work together through a learn by doing approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you for enabling more diverse voices and knowledge to engage. We're going to stay in South America. We're going to invite Jean Amato up to share his experience and knowledge on this topic. So, Jean?
I'll stay. I don't have, so I'll be the presentation actually. Yeah, I'll present myself, yeah. So, yeah, I'm gonna be very brief. So I was part of one project with the Belmont Forum on the food security call, and part of the idea of sharing the experience here is to bring what the project was able to accomplish, and on that, what spin-off we were able to, at least I was able to identify from that. So the project was funded by 6 agencies, actually from the UK, South Africa, China, India, Brazil, and the US. So it was a very broad team. And looking to a team, thematic that is quite relevant and very diverse throughout the globe, which is the food systems and food security. I think the identification of a specific patterns throughout the globe in terms of where the nutrition is being, the food nutrition is being effectively produced, and what is the threat that current changing climate is posing to the systems. It was one of the major outcomes of the project. A lot of these were dealing with modeling, but there was a lot of connections to specific producers in the different countries. So there was a connection to food production in South Africa, in Brazil, in China, and in India as well. So it was really, really interesting how all this came together, and being able to produce a framework on how smart agriculture can be produced. A big challenge is that it's not one single answer for the globe. We're seeing the same little ball, but there's different options everywhere. And talking about food systems, this is quite relevant. And one discussion that came out of that, that I was very involved on, is on how you propagate this, and how you define and how you help to form leadership in sustainable science. So sustainable science is based on interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, not only the approach, but the skills, and how that actually can, which I think is the next generation that Maria talks about, and a little bit on what Marcela showed in terms of capacity building, what we've seen before, and and how that comes together. And so the transdisciplinary, the major challenge is that identify people with ability to work in this environment and do the bridge between the producing of knowledge and the solutions on the place. So I think our community have a strong responsibility on not only supporting the science, not only supporting the production of knowledge, but supporting the forming actually leadership on this road. And I think it's one of the big challenges that we face. So I think that's part of what I want to share. I have data, and I have nice figures from the projects. If you want to see, we can share it later. But I think that was basic. I think one of the big phrases that we discussed a lot is how we envision for beyond the status quo, how we change that. And I think this is on forming strong leaderships, on keeping the momentum of this of the knowledge base produced. And because we know there's a lot of waves against around, and I think the strength of the knowledge, the strength of what is produced, which actually creates the ground to move on. So a lot of this skills goes through a transdisciplinary thinking. So that was basically what I would like to share. And I did have a little presentation, but I don't have it. I can send you a lunch. And so thanks for the time, and yeah, I'm glad to move on to discussions.
You're not off the hook yet. You're going to have questions. So we're going to turn now to Tiana O'Donnell and her interventions.
Much better. Thank you. I bucked at the trend and didn't make any slides, and I did that deliberately because I thought we could just have a conversation. I am here as Future Earth Australia, up here on this panel in particular, but I'm at this meeting with a few hats, one of which is FEA. The other one is as Paul Birch, representing CSIRO, but I'd like to think I'm a slightly younger, possibly better looking version of Paul Birch. Don't record that. And also with a third hat on, which is as one of the three-legged stool, we tend to call it, that is bringing together SRI 2020. And we're really excited in Australia to be hosting that. Future Earth Australia is based in Canberra, but we have very strong connections in Brisbane, and we kind of work between the two. And I'm going to mention just a little bit about our thinking behind the SRI bid at the close of the few remarks I will say here. So in being asked to be on this panel, the brief was, how do you connect diverse expertise for transdisciplinary efforts? And we did that in a number of different ways in Future Earth Australia. But in listening to my colleagues and in reflecting on that brief, what occurred to me just now was that we are in fact the bridge. Future Earth Australia acts as the bridge between a range of different stakeholders and diverse interests. We're an excellent and strong bridge because we're based at the Australian Academy of Science, and that lends us not only the legitimacy of Australia's leading science organisation, but also the independence from various other interests. So people trust us and people are willing to engage with us from the outset. And that's an advantage that we know we have, but every now and then I sort of do a stock take and think, well, that's something worth pondering about and worth reflecting on in more detail. Some examples of how that has benefited the work that we're doing. I'm going to go national, regional, and then talk to SRI, so we're doing a nested scale thinking here. On the national front, we do have an early career researcher and practitioner program, and my colleague Donna Robson is going to talk to you much more about that in detail tomorrow. We're very proud of it, and we love it and see it as a great way to train the next generation to be thinking transdisciplinary right from the get-go. When I did my PhD, which was interdisciplinary, I used to get many funny looks. Why aren't you doing yours just in law? Because boring was my response. I still love the law, but a straight PhD in law would be a bit much. And equally, why aren't you just doing it in geography or in the social sciences more broadly? If we're serious about coastal climate change adaptation, then it needs to be inter or transdisciplinary, was my response at the time, and it still is. That's a lot more accepted now, but back then, not so much. So in thinking about how Future Earth Australia acts as the bridge and plays our role as a conduit in enabling the co-design and co-production of scientific knowledge into practice, one of our more substantive programs this year and areas of focus has been on urban systems. And we kicked that off last year, bringing together a diverse range of people in a room much like this, and we said to them over the course of the day, what do we think about Australian cities? How can they be more sustainable? And do we need a national roadmap over the next 10 years to achieve what you think is the vision? And we thought we would get a yes to the first two questions, and then some inertia and no real way forward to the last question. But to our surprise, it was a yes to all of those questions, and then they said, Future Earth Australia should drive this forward and lead this. And so we took that challenge, and since then we have consulted, co-designed, worked with about 450 different very senior stakeholders, if we can use that very clunky term, representing government, industry, the private sector, early career researchers, Indigenous folk involved, academic researchers of course, and others. And we're at the end of that now. We've taken all those views and perspectives and put them together in one document, which when you look at the end product, you think, oh, that's nice and looks pretty easy. It's been a nightmare, but an absolute pleasure of a nightmare to be involved in. And we're really proud of that work. The second thing, moving now to the more regional scale, is the network that has been developed, and Paul Burgess had a significant role in this along with a few other Australian people and one from New Zealand and in the Pacific, in bringing together inter and transdisciplinary researchers. And earlier this year they decided to not only get together to discuss how they could work more closely together, but to create an organisation. And they've called that Nitro Oceania. The Nitro is the National Inter and Transdisciplinary Research Organisation. Sometimes I think the O should be for Oceania, but that's okay. And I'm on the executive of that too, and Future Earth Australia are co-hosting the Secretariat for Nitro Oceania. The vision behind Nitro is to bring very senior leaders in inter and transdisciplinary research together, not only to discuss the way forward, but to bring with them some mentees that they can train and enable to become the next generation of leaders in this space. It's a very exciting network, and we're very pleased to be part of it. Thirdly, we are supporting Future Earth Coasts in their conference that they are hosting also in Australia next year, in October on the Gold Coast. And in providing that support, we really took seriously and took a step back in many ways the spirit in which the university hosting the conference wanted this event to be delivered. And that university is Southern Cross University, and they wanted a very strong Indigenous engagement component to this conference. Now, Australia has a reputation in our region as being a bit over the top, coming in over the top, not properly listening, not really creating space. And we're really acutely aware of that in our network, given the range of stakeholders and people involved. And so we had a very long meeting at the start of Future Earth Coasts and said, we don't think any of us white people should be designing this program at all. We think we should hand this over to a local mob, Indigenous elders, and we should ask them if they would like to shape it, and if they say yes, we should let them, and we should use our privilege to do so. And we asked them, and they said, well, let's talk, and we talked for a long time. And then they went away, and then they came back, so let's talk a little bit more. And then we talked a bit more. And over the last 9, 10, 11 months, we are now in the position of having an amazing conference that is all about relational ontologies and relational ways of interacting. So instead of thinking about transdisciplinary research as a problem that needs a solution, we are approaching this with the view and the lens of relationships matter to all of this, and how we interact with each other and those relationships should come first, and the knowledge and the solutions will flow therefrom. So we're really excited about that meeting, and of course you should all attend that after you've all attended SRI 2020, which is the fourth point we want to make here on this panel. In putting together the bid to host SRI 2020, we really wanted to highlight our ability to connect diverse expertise, and not just scientific expertise, different knowledge systems, working with our local Indigenous elders and different Indigenous groups, and we have hundreds across Australia. And that's just Australia. Then there's also, of course, New Zealand, our wonderful neighbours nearby, who sometimes we adopt and want all for ourselves, but They are an entity, of course, in their own right, and do Indigenous relations much, much better, in my humble view, than what we tend to do in Australia, and engaging across the Pacific. So we are taking that ethos with us into the planning for SRI 2020, and are really looking forward to teasing out a little bit more this idea of how we engage in relationships, how we think about our relationships with each other, what that means for transdisciplinary research, how we engage the private sector often depends on those relationships. Some of my secretariat have worked in government, and we in the Academy indeed engage with government quite regularly, and there's nothing worse than going into government and saying, well, here's a great idea, we need some research money for it. They just sort of look at you and go, okay, thanks. It's not about the idea. You can have the best idea in the world, even the best solution, but you need also the relationships to underpin it and make it happen. So that's how we try and mostly succeed in connecting diverse expertise for transdisciplinary efforts, and we're super excited to do that for SRI.
Thank you so much, Tiana. We're super excited, and you're going to hear about SRI many times. We're going to indoctrinate all of you. I wish we had made a little temporary tattoo for SRI to hand out with your packet. So, you know, maybe that's something to add to our ideas. We're going to keep going. We've got two more great perspectives to share. Ganson Play has provided some slides as well. And as a member of Belmont Forum, has a lot to share.
Thank you very much, Erika. The best way for me to start, especially when I'm in government circles, is to just say distinguished guest, and that includes every one of you. It's one way of avoiding protocol. I was just saying to Hassan earlier that I don't know whether it was Erika's plan, but when she asked the photographer for all of us to move in, at least we'll go back to know that coming to the Belmont Forum was a moving experience. It's good to see familiar faces. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Ganson Pillay. I'm from South Africa, the National Research Foundation. And I want to share with you a few ideas. One of the ideas I want to share with you is that it's difficult often as a science granting council or funding agency to operate in a silo. And you have to look at the institutional arrangements not only nationally, but internationally, if you're going to align efforts to get outcomes. So the National Research Foundation actually operates at two levels. We operate as a science granting council agency, okay, which is here. And we also operate as a research performing agency, for example, the Square Kilometre Array, the Temba Labs, the nuclear clusters, etc. And we have to be cognizant with government. Now, one of the things that's come out recently is that the new white paper on science, technology, and innovation requests a quadruple helix approach to funding. And that's largely involving academia, government, business and industry, and civil society. So why would the Belmont Forum actually be interested in looking at transdisciplinary research? The answer is fairly simple. There's a greater chance of delivering an outcome that has positive societal benefits than you would through a silo mentality of one discipline only. It's as simple as that. And the question is that, how do we navigate it? I just very quickly want to share with you that, as Erika had shown, South Africa joined in 2010, and then in 2011, those were the CRAs that we took part in. We have some of our PIs of the CRAs who are in the audience, so I won't go and explain the work that's been done there, all right? But just to show you that over the years, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 15, we've had CRAs, as well as there were projects that were selected for phase 1 grants as well. What was interesting as well is that the Belmont Forum used the National Research Foundation once for assessing CRA proposals. And I must admit that we had a very robust system. But there's one thing that I want to share, and it's about a science granting council. If you're going to assess transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research, the process, the application templates have to ask the right questions so you elicit the information that you seek in order to make an appropriate assessment. In the absence of that, it's very difficult. We did have a workshop in Erika, whether you remember this one, okay? We joined forces with START, ISSC, the University of Stellenbosch, ETH, etc., to look at transdisciplinary approaches. And I think when I conclude, I want to end in the discussion, I want to hope that the Belmont Forum will take some steps towards clearly a shared understanding of what is being looked for in terms of what are the disciplinary and the quality. I've heard various terms, and I'll come to that just now. The other important thing is that when you're looking at transdisciplinarity, I've been on the council of EASA for the last decade, and I've seen it grow over the years. And there's some models there that shows transdisciplinary, the GAINS model. There's a global energy assessment that took in a whole lot of knowledge domains to come together to produce a product. Then, of course, there's the food, agriculture, biodiversity, land, and energy, the FABLE pathway and scenario. And of course, that's delivered a particular outcome. Now, that's only possible when you have people from different disciplines coming together with a shared understanding of what needs to be delivered. So the other important point is that in any proposal, you have to plan for impact and manage for impact. Funding agencies are no longer interested in outputs and outcomes. A paper for an academic in Nature, the academic climate for a researcher is a paper in Nature. But the societal good is being questioned more and more, especially when you use public funds and you ask yourself, what is the value proposition of making that investment in the research, and what is it delivering that societal benefit? There are some challenges that I want to put to the Belmont Forum. This issue of transdisciplinary research is not unique. It's global. Every science council, every funding agency is faced with this as to how to do it. I've come across many terms, and there's transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. The latest one I heard was pluridisciplinary, which covers everything. It's an interesting term because it's all encompassing and something that we can talk about. So South Africa, as a science branding council, also belongs to the Global Research Council, one of the founding members of the GRC, and it has all the science councils of the world together to deliberate on certain issues that are of common interest. And one of the first statement of principles that we put out was on peer review. And I think what's important is that peer review is central to all assessments. So how you do it, where you do it, when you do it, good, robust peer review systems are critical to inform the outcomes of any assessments. So there were about 7 principles that the GRC in 2016 issued. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel again, okay? There's things that you can draw from. And finally, what I want to say is that in South Africa, we, as Erika mentioned in passing, and you mentioned as well with the Australian experience, part of our mandate is that we have to invest in research in every knowledge domain, including IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Systems. It's gazetted, and there's no escape from it. So we do have a Center for IKS, for example, that we invest in, and we do invest in IKS across the knowledge domains in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ganson. I think we're really building up on a lot of potential questions for the interactive session. So I see a lot of faces down at home. So I'm sure you're typing questions in your notes out, and we're looking forward to those. So Atsuko, please.
I'd like to share about my cooperative research project, cooperative research action, COPERA, carbon budget of ecosystem and cities and villages on permafrost in Eastern Russian Arctic. This project is conducted by Japan and leading PI, and also Russia, and also the United States. In this project, we estimate the carbon budget or the carbon absorbance, carbon uptake by ecosystem, by tundra and also taiga. And also we estimate how much carbon dioxide is released from the society. And this is how to say, it's a scientific field result. And also my colleagues published this result for the publication. And also, how to say, what we did in the CRA is we made a stakeholder meeting every year. So this year is the last period of the research. So this is the last year, and we so this is the fifth, to say, stakeholder meetings. And every year I made this stakeholder meeting, and also we report some kind of research for local government, actually to the local government, Republic of Sakha. And but how to say, yeah, how to say, anyway, we have to reduce the carbon dioxide emission, of course. And how to do this? Actually, no ideas for the people or the local government. So I'd like to make some, how to say, the project with young people. Because Federal University, Northeastern Federal University, Russia, in Yakutsk, is the biggest university in this region. And future leaders are studying in this university. And I would like to inspire the people and government and also the students and change their way of thinking by showing scientific data. That is also very important. And also inspiring young people is the best way to change the society, I think. So anyway, we started working with young people. That project is sustainable campus project at the Russian University. And that, project, sustainable campus project, has four very important the field. One is education and research, because we are there in the university. And also environment, also CO2 emission is, this is also the environment. And also one more very important one is local communication. So they need to talk with local community. And the fourth one is management of the university. So anyway, we used this sustainable campus project. And in this October, sorry, in September, we had the final stakeholder meeting. And in this meeting, we had two parts of the meeting. One is a stakeholder meeting. Some local government officers come, some of them are ministers, and anyway, many people coming to sustainable stakeholder meetings. And this is the first part of the meeting. And second part is sustainable campus project. So we have young people and students, and also the staff member in the university. We have a meeting, and so what kind of things can we make some new project by students or with young people. So sustainable campus project has we asked to the student, it's not it's not a camp it's not how to say. It's not my opinion because students have to be their own project or their own, how to say, activity. So it's a little bit, it's not a capacity building. And also they have some proposal for a new project. And we maybe this part, sustainable campus project meeting, the result will be submitted to rector of the university. So the final stage of our project cooperative stakeholder meetings, and stakeholder meetings has a resolution, and using our result of using the result of our project, and also using this, how to say, sustainable campus project or the project with young people is we will use this, how to say, the result. And also I think the young people, not only the young people, but also in the young people and also the university have some project to reduce the carbon dioxide emission and also the saving the ecosystem. And they will have a new project. And I hope they will have a small fund from the university and small fund for the project from the Sahara Republic. So I really have to say, hope to make this sustainable campus project in the future to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my takeaway from these presentations and interventions is to bridge knowledge systems, we have to change not only education and the access to training and future funding, but the manner in which they are educated, their surroundings, their environment, even their process, how they engage in co-creation, the contact with stakeholders, recognizing that is, as Tiana said, a clunky term. I think of it as, holding a stake in more than one way, and holding us to our promise of a better future. So I would like to ask the panelists if they want to ask each other something. I would like to turn it to the audience. If we as an organization are really going to embrace the Belmont Forum Challenge, and we are trying to enable different knowledge systems to come together to not just create new understanding, but also move the action needle a bit towards achieving a sustainable future. We've got some great ideas that's been shared with us from members, awardees, funders, early career. Robert led us off with his ideas. He's already proactive in that piece. What are your ideas? What are your questions? Or what are your experiences in addressing this challenge of that shared understanding and shared interest in solving a problem together? So, do any of the panelists want to ask each other? All right, you got to earn your coffee. We need hands. We've got hands up. Okay, I'm going to give this one to the panelists, and I'm going to run up in these unforgiving shoes upstairs. I was wearing nice, sensible shoes, but. Okay, and please let us know who you are.
Hello, Maria Magnet, Climate Service Center, Germany. We belong to the Helmholtz Association in Germany. And I have one question and one suggestion. First question is, everyone has been talking about transdisciplinary research, Our colleague from South Africa did the mention of trans, inter, pluri, and whatever we want to call it. But is there a real definition everyone agrees on? Is the first one. And the second one, when it comes to really finance transdisciplinary research, when it comes to bringing farm association, when it comes to bringing small and medium enterprises, there's no funding for them. So researchers can be funded, but not the others. And then it comes to the moment when the colleagues that are farmers associations representatives or NGOs or small and medium enterprises say, I'm really sorry, but I cannot go into your consortium because I'm not going to get funded. So these two things. First of all, do we agree all here on one definition? Are we talking about the same? Are we talking about involving people from outside formal education? And then, if yes, how do we want to finance them with the actual funding mechanisms?
Thank you, and I'm bringing down a mic for the other side. She'll bring one up to you, and I'm going to bring this to the stage so they can be answering while we're running mics around. Okay, anybody like to take that question?
I'll deal with the first one. Thanks for the question. The reason I brought up the topic was that, in my view, if you have the Belmont Forum, then all members need to have common and shared understanding of what is meant by a particular term, whatever it may be, whether it's trans, multi, or pluri. But there has to be a shared understanding, because in that way you're leveling the playing field so that all applicants have an equal and independent opportunity of accessing funds because they are providing the information that is being sought for because of the shared understanding. So my suggestion in one of the slides was that perhaps Belmont Forum should further explore the possibility of having some position paper on this issue.
Hi. I'm going to be a little controversial. I'm not sure that there is an agreed definition on transdisciplinarity. I'm also not sure whether that's the benefit of it or not. My sense is possibly that is a benefit. Speaking from the Australian experience, we bring everyone along on the journey. We don't actually even have transdisciplinarity in any of our mission statements or values or my elevator pitch when someone says, I want to give you money, what do you do? But we do co-design and we do co-produce with everybody. And I use the urban plan that we're developing as an example of that because we've brought together about 8 or 9, maybe more, different disciplines with universities. That in itself, I think, is a major achievement. If you think about universities as entities, let alone civil society, not-for-profit sector, Indigenous people and so on. So that's the first part of your question, and it's not an answer. I'm aware of that, just some further thoughts and provocations. The second part of your question, and what I think is probably more important for a group like this, is that we, people with more money, more privilege, pay for those people to participate in some way. So we've got, and I'll again use the example that I talked about before, the Future and Coast Conference. Indigenous elders don't do anything for free anymore in Australia, and I think that's fair and rightly so. So we have to come up with the money to get them there. And that's the first priority. Before we come up with money for anything else, the first point is money for meaningful engagement with our Indigenous folk and mob back home. That's something we should all do better and would be perhaps something that would be further discussed in how we are really serious about engaging across different cultures and particularly in Global South, because it's very, very different. They won't take you seriously. They won't trust you, won't even want to start a relationship with you unless they know you're serious. And for some, that is, well, if you've got money, then we know you're serious, and we'll then start to have a relationship with you. It's not about the money. It's about the showing of the value of the relationship.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for the question. I think it's. I think there's no one question or one answer for that, but in one way is that I think the aiming is actually to get the solution for problems that are So we probably are going to a mode of adaptation that is very strong, and that requires different disciplines to deal with the facts. The question is how the funding agencies can help on that. I think the Belmont came in an interesting way of provoking that within the agencies. So another hand that I have here with FAPEP is that how we, within the agency, think about on funding, and then comes back to the peer review process and how publication of this is being accepted within the scientific community. So there's a blur zone within the scientific community and the decision-making process in terms of how that fund comes into place, and or how the result of the science comes into place. So if we go to these international panels that are trying to concise, summarize information like the IPBES, that try to bring the indigenous knowledge to the same level not to the same level, but to the same expression as the regular way of producing science, to try to make a document that has a effective action. I think it's a growing subject, and to me, to my understanding, the way of working with different perspectives and different funding agencies has helped this along. So if we got, like, I'm on the Global Carbon Project Steering Committee, and then every time that they produce the global carbon budget, and that shakes all the media worldwide. It's something that, it was built on 10 years of producing good science. So the way of, to my understanding, is that the transdisciplinary has the call from the solution thing. And to my first very brief intervention is that we need to help as funding agencies to form, and not only the capacity building, but to form people that are able to lead this process more and more. So that's what we have, in a way, we need to find mechanisms within the funding scheme that, okay, so how we do this, how we interact more. And that might be, the SSS mechanism of having people from science interacting with policy. So there are mechanisms out there which I think, in a way, goes through the need for transdisciplinary.
Oh, Marcella, and then I think we're going to take a question from Andrew.
Okay, I just wanted to address the question, I'm Maria, about the engagement of the private sector. And we had interesting experiences even from the seed grant program. One of the very few experiences that we've had from one of the project teams, they came to us and say, thank you very much, I don't need your funding anymore because we got funding from the private sector. And they've been working together since 2005, so many, many years. And it was with the Farmers Association of a small country in Paraguay. It was a seed grant project that was interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. We were looking at climate and El Nino forecasts for agricultural production in Paraguay and in some of the neighboring countries. And I believe that once the private sector sees the value of the research and applied research and the engagement with this community, which were farmers and producers, they will fund it. And they are funding it for 15 years now. It started with a training workshop with the development of a team that was composed of natural, social scientists, and policymakers. And they presented that to the Farmers Association. They saw the value and made funding for many, many years now. They still are working together, and we are happy to see, how successful this team has been, doing work in Paraguay with the U.S., Argentina, and Brazil. The other experience, it was more recent, about a year and a half ago. Another seed grant team developed these co-designed transdisciplinary proposal on water governance, looking at interactions of mining companies with indigenous communities in the north part of Chile. And they've been funded by one of the largest mining companies in Chile to facilitate that dialogue, that governance dialogue. So those two, examples, we didn't really knew what was going to happen, but just in terms of facilitating the communication, having identified a policy-relevant topic, whether it's for a mining company or for the Farmers Association in Paraguay, it gave them the value of getting the funding from the private sector. So I think the issue is how to facilitate that dialogue and communication, how to identify policy-relevant problems for the private sector, and I think they will come aboard.
So Andrew, I'm going to ask your indulgence. It is coffee time, and I want to keep this conversation going over some caffeine so that we can keep to time, because we do have to leave on a bus at 4 o'clock for our social event. But I want to thank all the panelists as well as the support from NERC, JST, and Vipashvi for our awardees that attended. Thank you so much. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I hope we can keep the conversation going. So thank you all.
I have some admin notes before we break for coffee. If you haven't found restrooms yet, keep right. You'll see signs of blue and pink. Also, for smokers here, be sure to go outside in front of the building and just step a little bit beyond the green line. Get ready to go for that. Also, if you haven't signed in yet officially, please, we'd like your autograph. Please do that. Please sign on the sign-in sheets. And also, let's not forget, we are all invited to dinner tonight. So enjoy your coffee or tea if you prefer.
如果没有中断，它半个小时再分一段。好 ，OK， 那我。你这样已经直播到 YouTube 上 ，YouTube 上就会永久有影片在上面。有，我现在还在录啊，所以我们在一边录。好这样。好，可以。你这还没录制？没有，这个是一嘎，这不是。因为它空间会不够。我一年够大。外面手机我不想用任何手机看。你现在喝水或茶吗？没事，我等下可以出去。好。 前行啊，怎么办？先换这个，有点赶不上变化。
Right, well, good afternoon, and if people who are outside the meeting room could start making their way back in, and we'll kick off in a second. Right. So, welcome to this afternoon's session, roundtable discussion, which is focused on enabling transformation. And I think I'm not going to say an awful lot because I think we really want to hear from our panel members that we have on stage with us. But you know, as a funding representative of the National Funding Agency, and many of us are funders in the room here, and you know, actually we have a huge job in terms of, hey, we want to fund excellent research and innovation, but actually we're often in almost all cases spending, you know, public funding, taxpayer funding, and we're spending the money of the people really to deliver benefits to society and to the economy. And so as funders we invest in research, but we also have a responsibility as the academics and innovators that undertake the research to go beyond just performing the research itself, to deliver impact, to deliver benefits, whether that's innovations through to scale up into commercial products, whether that's data and information and evidence that informs policy making, whether that's new tools and techniques for monitoring change. And so what I'm really excited to hear about from the panel that we have here today is from their different perspectives. So we have some research performers, we have Future Earth, we have some of our partner organisations about what they see as important in enabling transformation in terms of use and uptake of research. And so for our first talk, I'm going to hand over to Brian Lung from McGill University.
Yes, so hello, I'm Brian Leung from McGill University. I am actually one of the awardees from the last biodiversity call, and we've been funded for about half a year now, and we had a first meeting in April. So our project is on developing and applying scenarios of biological invasions for the 21st century. In terms of what is transformative, and this pretty much reflects everything we heard in the earlier session, and it is what has made this project possible and what we hope to extend with these types of projects. So basically, one of the things is the amounts of data which are currently available. And I would say that the landscape has transformed entirely over the last decade, where the kinds of questions we can answer now just would not have been possible before. And that is largely due to all of the databases which we can now make use of to answer global problems, really complex issues. Another thing that people had mentioned was this idea of whatever you want to call it, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, what was the other? Pluridisciplinary? Yeah, okay. Any of those terms will do for me. Nonetheless, right, that idea that none of us has the entire skill set, and by working with people across the different disciplines, we can identify both the challenges as well as the opportunities to make substantive differences, right? And the third one that people have mentioned, and again, I wholeheartedly subscribe to, is the idea of inclusivity, right? So even if we work across disciplines, it is still a small subset of the way that we understand the world. By working with stakeholders, indigenous groups, as well as farmers, as well as different people in urban centers, right? We have a better understanding of what the challenges are and why things will fail, of what their hypotheses capabilities are that we as scientists can be able to test. So they could pose both the questions to us, as well as tell us what their value systems are, right? So all of those different things, I think, are at the center of transformation. And in that context, you know, like I had mentioned, those are some of the things which have made this project possible. The fact that there are all those data sources available, that we have increased our technological abilities. We are now want to do what IPCC did for climate change, right? We want to extend those types of scenarios and those types of understanding for invasive species as well. So invasive species is very important. Like climate change, it is one of the drivers of environmental change. They cost society hundreds of billions of dollars a year, right? They cause dramatic losses of biodiversity. So they're very, very important from a number of different perspectives, and trying to understand how they will change in the next century, especially as we change, especially as our society changes, is at the core of this project. So it is a global project. We are trying to predict global-wide biodiversity changes, but we also want to look at different scales. So global, continental, and one of the things which I'm contributing to this is the regional perspective, an area that is often not examined for invasive species. And the reason why this is possible, and so I'll tell you a bit about this project as well. The reason why this is possible is because GIL has been in the global south, in Panama, for about 2 decades. And so we have built partnerships with indigenous groups. We have built partnerships with many of the different groups, many of the different policymakers, research organizations within Panama. Okay, I'm actually the director of the McGill Tropical Environment Option, and so we have training programs also there, where we're about half now. We have about half Canadians and half people from Latin America. And my contribution to that larger project, and this current project allows me to attach lots of different things onto it. So I view this also as transformative. It's basically this idea of building a whole country integrated sustainability model, right? So spatially explicit, computational model, which then starts to try to look at the different facets or the different layers that would undergo sustainability. So as I had mentioned, the world has changed dramatically with the types of data which have become available, and those are oftentimes very broad-based. In this context, we're trying to narrow the scope and have much more depth within a single given region, so we can start looking at all those interactive terms. So here we're interested in trying to start modeling the biodiversity of the entire country, right? So we're building models where we are able to estimate distributions of all the plant species, for example. We're trying to model the physical environment, so the hydrology, probability of floods, et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to link those with models of social changes, urban development, all these different elements to start, again, trying to form a platform that other people could just use to start answering questions, okay? And in that context, we will be able to dramatically improve the kinds of questions and sophistication with which we can answer things. So these are just some of the different elements that we've been creating, okay? And it has already borne fruit. Because I have this in place, I can connect with the Belmont Forum, right? Because I have this in place, people who are interested in the urban development of Panama City, we can just tell them what the consequence for reforestation around the city will be, right? In terms of flood mitigation, carbon sequestration, et cetera, right? So we can start looking at all these different layers and start thinking about how they interact. We can provide these different layers and make them available to whoever wants to ask these questions. People who are from Panama have shown a lot of interest in just contributing to it now. And, you know, so we now have those interaction terms where it is delivering back to the researchers there as well, okay? And so we can start asking questions about policy. Because we have these things there, we can provide educational opportunities, both from students at McGill directly, as well as people from there, and outreach as well, where we can be useful as these stakeholders there tell us what is useful to them, we can start helping them answer questions, and as well as provide them with funding.
Thanks very much, Grant. So I think now hand over to Josh Chusbury from Future.
All right. So I was asked by someone in the audience if I was tweeting from the stage, but actually I was not. I just, you know, I drew my notes for this is, so I will start with that. I'm trying to keep it to time here. So last week I was at an international conference where sustainability and development professionals were meeting. And I was on stage with an eminent scientist, a sustainability scientist from the US, and a director of a major development studies think tank in the UK. And we were there just talking about the need for greater organization within the sustainability research and innovation community, and the need for a professional society that would help support the growth globally of a cadre of research that are coming out because of the actions like the Belmont Forum's actions, but also because of the actions of 5, 6, 7 different national science foundations that are now having directorates in sustainability, and the associated infrastructure that is being developed globally, oftentimes in just national scale, sometimes in only some sectors, to support sustainability. So we've got 5 or 6 major journals in this space. We've got no international associations supporting the growth of this community around the world. We have, and we have the same number of major, NSFs or National Science Foundations also supporting here. So this was the topic of the conversation. But I tell you that only because there was a moment in the Q&A afterwards where an assistant professor, she was an engineer, raised her hand and said, my colleagues have been telling, I really want to do transdisciplinary work. That's where my passion is. My colleagues are telling me, don't do that till you get tenure. What should I do? And, my colleague next to me from the UK basically said, your colleagues are right. You shouldn't do it until you get tenure. And it's 2019. And the average age of tenure in my country is 39. And if we don't change that system, we're in trouble. Like, we absolutely have to think differently about how we engage academic organizations around the world and the individuals within them, so we get our best talent engaged in what we're doing in this room much sooner than we're doing it now. And I think Belmont Forum is critical to that, because one thing that allows professors in their early careers to engage in the kind of work we want them to engage in are funding opportunities to do that work. So, that means, this is a scaling home. This is where the work that the Belmont Forum is doing absolutely needs to scale and reach more people around the world. But it's also, like as Maria said, it's an alliance problem, right? It's a systems change problem. So the transformations in energy systems, food systems, urban systems, production and consumption systems, finance, this is all hands on deck approach, right? And that means that research has to get done differently than it's getting done today. And I don't think it's about which terms we use to describe that change, but it's about the change itself. So, Future Earth is one part of that, and I'll just give you a few examples of what we're doing in that space. This is about bringing researchers together from across geographies and disciplines, with innovators, civil society, with public sector and private sector engagement, to build stronger evidence for decision makers. And we want to do that at scale, like from the scales that matter, not just at a global scale, including a global scale, but also all the way down to a municipal scale, where a lot of policies get made and come into. And so we do this in 3 basic ways: organizing, supporting, and magnifying integrated research, shaping narratives, and by building the field of sustainability research and innovation. And the professional society is just part of that, but that's a part of also the Sustainability Research and Innovation Conference we're doing with the Belmont Forum, another part of building and supporting that field. But a couple of examples on the scaling bit. For example, the Bengaluru Water Lab is an approach we've been taking with coming out of our Water Futures group to work deeply with all sectors within Bengaluru, and citizen scientists, city planners, engineers, local and global water experts, to focus on the needs of that city, 8.5 million people, for clean, reliable water for its population. It's where sustainability hits the ground in a case like that. At the national level, Many countries around the world are struggling with how to approach the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a complex set of interrelated goals, and building science-based pathways to those goals is as much as anything, it's a mobilization problem. It's how to bring the right people to the table on the national scales so that the national level leading scientists are engaged in a process with decision makers in driving forward decisions in their countries. And we're mobilizing that country by country. It was started in France. We're now working with NRF to start building that throughout parts of Africa and try and mobilize that by bringing funding to bear so that communities can bottom up this process. And then at the global scale, there's a vital need for a greater science engagement. So this year was the first time that the United Science Report was put together. That was the science input for the High-Level Political Forum for the most recent COP. And that was Future joining with UNEP and WMO and the world's science leaders to provide a crowdsourced scientific expert analysis of the major insights we need for climate science, for example. So I think all those levels are critical, and I would say that most of those examples are around building science and science to action. But I also think that the research is not sufficient on its own, so a lot of it is also about this sort of awkward space about how people perceive that research and how people perceive research linked to innovation and integrated with narratives. So things like this magazine, which I've been doing on from, Anthropocene magazine, just solutions journalism. That fantastic writers from around the world writing about solutions to sustainability problems. Because decision makers aren't reading the Nature paper, but they are reading the condensation of that in narrative form, because most people work on narrative form. Things like meeting the 1.5 ambition. Like, what do we need to do in 2030? Half our emissions. Why and how and in what sectors? These kind of reports, they hit different audiences in different ways than our scientific outputs. And I think the Belmont Forum realizes that and is trying to support that kind of work. And we've decided that's absolutely critical. But I think I'll just end by saying this is, a little stepping all the way back. And I would say that this is a little bit of a David and Goliath moment, right? The truth is, if we went back to the 1940s and found a random individual in an industrialized nation at the sort of peak of the industrial revolution, stuck in a time machine and shot them forward today, they'd run screaming to one of two institutions, and one of them would be a university. The other might be a church, because these institutions have not changed very much since the beginning of the 1840s. When we started educational institutions as fundamentally there to provide knowledge in a deep time that we needed, but not to respond rapidly to the needs of society. And today we're at a place where those institutions need to change. And Belmont Forum, I think of as that insurgence within those institutions around the world to create the opportunities for change, to break down silos and create a new type of science that is more team science, is more integrated science, and is focused on solutions to the problems at the various scales at which decisions are made. I think finally that the last thing is that what I'm hearing on the panel so far is that this is about it's not about a moonshot really. It's about a lot. It's about nurturing the seeds of innovation and the solutions that are coming up all over the world, and allowing those to take root in the place where they're going to have impact, and then scaling those. It's much more of a silver buckshot sort of problem where we build out many, many solutions to many problems. And I'm really thankful to be a part of this community that's doing just that.
Thanks very much, Josh. So next we'll hear from Makaiza.
Okay, so this is new for me. I'm an early career researcher / science policy fellow, and I sit at the National Science Foundation in the US. And what Josh was talking about in terms of the infrastructure just rang true. I graduated recently, and sitting in the realm between science and policy is not something that is taught at our institutions. It is something that I have learned after. And that definitely needs a change if we're talking about being transformative and having actionable science, something that decision makers and policy makers can use to make educated and science-based decisions on an everyday basis. And to do that, I think we need to look at building capacity. And we tend to think of capacity in terms of the availability of resources, but it's not only that, it's the availability of a supportive infrastructure, like what Josh mentioned, as well as the availability of a workforce that can plan, that can deliver, that can kind of scope the current landscape as the needs of our society. And to address capacity building, to have that transform into policy making, we need to be looking at things that are relevant to the stakeholders that we have. It's one thing to sit in a room and say, I want to do transformative science, and we do science that sits on a shelf. It's another thing to look at policies and to fill gaps and needs that are relevant to the stakeholders that are involved. And we've heard mention, I think Maria talked about the next 10 years of the forums and looking at the LMICs and what they are needed and how to increase connectivity with them. I think for that, we need to look at not only what is important to them, but giving them ownership in the way in which capacity is built so that it's sustained on time, through time, and on different scales. I think that is important if we want to look at transforming anything to move towards a decision-making process. And I also wanted to mention that as scientists, we are taught to do science. We're kind of moving away from curiosity-driven science to more of a resource-competing kind of science environment. But I think having environments like the Belmont Forum, where we can encourage the collaboration, the coherence, the talking across borders, the transnationality of ideas and of practices and of initiatives will help us to build best practices that can be shared. And I think that's important for early career. We want to have a home, we want to have a place where we feel like this direction of moving between the realms of science and policy, there are like-minded people out there that are doing the same thing. And one final thing, I think I have been a fly on the wall in some rooms where these important decisions are being made. And I commend you guys for making it. If there are no early career representatives at your table, you're not building capacity for the next generation. So as we move forward, I would encourage you guys to think about incorporating and building your next generation of leaders and help them to sit and help make some of those decisions that you'll make on a daily basis.
Thanks very much, Michaela. What a great challenge to throw out to us all for discussion in a minute. So I'll hand over to Alexandros Gasparatos from the University of Tokyo.
Thank you. So my name is Alex Gasparatos. I'm from the University of Tokyo, not particularly Japanese, but this is how life wrote it. So I was the PI of one of the Belmont Forum projects on land use and food security. Our research was trying to understand what is the competition of industrial crops with food crops, the land competition, and what is the effect on food security in Africa. So I'll just share some of the things that we learned along the process. So the question that I was asked is how to build capacity to inform policy and guide decision making and encourage best practices. This is two ways. First of all, you have to build it within your team. You have to build the capacity of the researcher. The second one is to build the capacity, maybe if that is the right word, I'm not really sure if it is the right word, but of the end user. So we happen to have both these challenges when we were doing the project. From the member of the research team, I was 35 at this point. It was my first PI project after a 4-year grueling postdoc process. I was on my knees, I was overworked, and somehow I have to start thinking how to start answering questions with real impact on the world. I've never been taught that, I was never asked to do that, but somehow I have to change somehow my mindset in order to achieve that, because we are getting money from funding agencies and we have something to do. We have promised something to do. So it was a very big process for me, but also it was for the research team. Our research team was very weird, let alone the different disciplines and nationalities. So we had two academic institutions, Oxford and Tokyo, very arrogant ivory tower institutions. We see the world like the best in our countries. We had two policy organizations, ODI, Overseas Development Institute, in London, and the United Nations University. And we had two applied research organizations, CSIR in South Africa, and Kew Gardens in the UK. Between us, we know how to do different kinds of research. We know how to cater to our stakeholders, but not necessarily to work together as a team. Let alone the discussions that we had, how to bring together the methodologies, how we are going to be packaging the results of our research, how we're going to be answering the questions, and how we're going to be approaching the stakeholders. What stakeholders? Because everybody was catering to somebody else at the end of the day. It took us quite a lot of time. So we had to build a lot of capacity within the research team, one way or another. Of course, some way that we try to do it is, this is where it starts melting with transdisciplinary research and co-design. We started from the beginning to start discussing with what we consider appropriate stakeholders to let us, to see if we understand the process well, we have everybody on board, and we're asking the questions the right way. Of course, you have to understand who to ask for these questions. You cannot go to your politician policy maker. You have to go to the technocrat policy maker, decision maker, in order to help you. So you cannot go for the Minister of the Environment, but you go to the head that is doing the economic modeling. And we're doing a lot of multi-stakeholder processes, trying to answer these questions. Are we asking the questions the right way? Are we packaging it the right way? So we used mediated modeling approaches, a lot of emails here and there, a lot of discussions, but somehow we try to do it. Then there is the other side of the story that is totally beyond your control. It is how the end user is going to take it up. So there are different ways, there are different problems there. What if your research is being used to promote and strengthen vested interests? We were working on biofuel impacts on food security. I don't think you could find a more value-laden type of research in the early 2010s. When we were saying there are positive and negative, the pro-biofuels were like, see, it's great, they are with us. The others were saying that, okay, these people are working for the biofuel company. So it was impossible to some way, and this is a very light example, but it was very impossible to control how our results were being taken up, because what we are doing, for better or worse, is very complicated. We have to sit down and progress. We are being given money in order to progress research, to find novel ways of answering questions. Hey, it's not easy. If it was easy, we're going to use a specific methodology, and then it's not going to be novel research. So we are pushing the frontier of knowledge, and at the same time pushing how to package it. And this is extremely difficult to do, because a lot of the work that we are doing has a lot of, how shall I put it, nuances. We're using statistical tools that are giving results in certain levels of confidence, and blah, 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 blah. How do you communicate this? And this is a very big problem. In our research, for example, we try to answer things like, does involvement in sugarcane production increase food security or decrease food security? Who is your ultimate stakeholder? The farmer. How can we go to a farmer in Africa and start saying, if you get involved with sugarcane production, your food security is going to be increasing, without saying all the other sides of the story? Because what if they start cutting their food crops, grow the sugarcane, drive the prices down, don't get the money, and you are like sitting in your house in Tokyo, you publish the paper, you check the the stakeholder box in the assessment, but in the end, basically you have a very counterintuitive result. So there are a lot of things that we have to fight somehow within our team, from building our own capacity to knowing how to communicate these results. And it's not easy when you are being asked at the same time to push the frontiers of knowledge. So this is something that, I don't know, maybe has to be addressed one way or another in the future, because you are asking from research teams that are overextended could do multiple things that were not necessarily qualified for. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Some great insights into the realities of building teams to take forward some of this research. So I'll now hand over to Helena, who's going to present some slides.
Thank you very much. I'm going to present some slides because I like pictures. I trained as grade 1 teacher. And here I am at the Belmont Forum. Really not able to use the technology either. Sorry, just want to find my presentation. Sorry. Okay, so I just wanted to thank also the panel that I'm on for the many different perspectives actually that have already been surfaced around capacity building and partnership building. And we've had, you know, the idea of modeling, improving our modeling, scaling, communication. We've seen the fantastic magazine, which I would also recommend. I've seen it before. We've had the point of inclusion. We've had the idea of organizing ourselves better. We've had an emphasis on capacity building, and we've also had a discussion now on the implications of the challenges for the kind of research that we're doing. I want to focus a little bit more on this, and that is the concept of learning, and also just at the same time share with you some of the work that we've been trying to do in this area, which is connected to one of the new areas of interest in the Belmont Forum as well. So I come from South Africa, from a university called Rhodes University, so I'm not in the science policy space as an actor. I'm actually a professor working with scholars, young scholars, to try to develop this area of scholarship which is called Global Change and Social Learning Systems, and I hold a Department of Social Innovation, National Research Foundation Research Chair, which is where I do this work from, and it's supported by the NRF. My colleagues over there have already been talking this morning. So the point that I want to try to look at is enabling transformation with what we call T-learning in times of rapid global change, including, of course, climate change. So I want to just firstly appreciate the invitation for being here, and I also want to appreciate the work space that we've been given in the last few years to open up some of the insights into this. And that has taken place in the Transformative Knowledge Networks of the Transformations to Sustainability program, which for those of you, I guess, in the science policy space will know that that was specifically focused on social sciences within the Future Earth system. And it was implemented by, when it started, the International Social Science Council, which has now become the International Science Council. And it was supported the first 3 years by CEDA and is now being supported by Belmont Forum. And of course also supported by our National Research Foundation, as we've already heard this morning. So we were part of this phase 1 research which took place between 2016 and 2018. And in the last period of that work we were also introduced to the phase 2 and all of the actors in the phase 2 program, the partners there. So it's been an incredibly rich space for learning about this kind of science internationally, especially from the social sciences perspective, and that doesn't mean that they're separated from the other sciences, but it's a kind of like a vantage point that you come in with and that you emphasize in the scientific landscape. And I'm appreciating here this point about letting our voices emerge, and that is because the social science voices are actually quite silent in a lot of the transdisciplinary environmental sciences and global change sciences. And I think it was the first time that we actually found a science call which actually wanted the research to be led by social scientists. And I was a PI on this project, and I was the only one from the Global South. So I was extremely stressed, very nervous, but also excited to be part of, you know, being able to speak into this global change research space with what I call emerging grammars, and that means it means emerging ways of seeing and thinking that are not yet known. And one of the problems that we were trying to address in this program is that, you know, everything that we know about learning is actually inadequate for the challenges that we face in the world today. So we were really trying to follow also a recommendation out of the IPCC, which said that they know learning is important, but they don't know what types of learning are needed for these changes that we need in society today. And we were trying to research these types of learning. And we kind of or know that a new kind of learning is needed, but we know it needs to be more inclusive, new configurations. We've already heard something about that this morning. We need to build partnerships with it. We need to co-engage academia with communities, policymakers, and a whole lot of other societal actors in new ways and in new configurations. And our institutions are not set up for it at all, actually. Our research institutions, our universities, our schools, our community social institutions. And we also have another problem, which really is this problem, and it's a problem that comes with the way in which modern science has been produced, and also the way in which modern science is being monopolized, and the way in which modern science is being communicated. And this is a little map, which is the world by scientific research output. You know, it's just a sort of impressionistic type of map, but based on stats from behind the scenes. And really what that shows us is that science is being monopolized and produced, you know, like somewhere up there, that side of the world, not in our side of the world. And this is a major challenge because the majority of the world's people are actually living in the global south. So there's some huge transformation that needs to occur here. And it's a huge transformation around scientific practice and process. And this book over here, Sousa Santos, I think is one of the best books for if you are interested in transdisciplinary science. It's an absolutely astounding book which analyzes the modern epistemological environment and context. And he writes about epistemologies of the South, and he talks about justice against epistemicide. And what he's actually doing there is he's saying that so much of the world's knowledges have been left out and have been ignored and have not been fully taken account of. That does not mean that they are not scientific. It just means that they've been excluded by hundreds of years of colonialism, actually, is what is being talked about a lot. So he talks about this idea of the abyssal line and how to move beyond the abyssal line. And we were really quite serious about this in our research project as we tried to think about tea learning. And so we used the idea of tea, and we didn't fill it in much. We said tea, let's keep it open, okay? Because what we need here is a counter-hegemonic concept that can be open, that can give us insight into transgressive learning we were pursuing, transformative learning, transdisciplinary learning, together learning. One of our colleagues from Vietnam actually said we should call this together learning. So we played with the tea, okay? And we tried through this research program to develop this more counter-hegemonic way of thinking about learning. We did that across quite a number of cases, across continents and countries, and we were trying to understand these qualities and processes. We did cross-case analysis, theory building, methodology development, synthesis work, all that type of thing, stuff that one does in a research program like this. And I'll just quickly flash some of the contexts in which the research was taking place, just because I want to make a point about the need for us to work in very, very diverse contexts, as diverse as we can find, in order to understand issues of inclusivity and how to advance the scope of the type of concerns that we are trying to deal with. So here's Ethiopia, here's India, with youth in India, youth and using technology in India, Colombia, looking at bioregional, rich biodiversity context. This is Malawi, with very high levels of marginalization, especially amongst women in context of drought. Here's the Netherlands trying to rebuild their food systems. Here's Vietnam in the Mekong Delta with huge areas of climate uncertainty. Here's Zimbabwe where they're dealing with both drought and economic stress. And here's Sweden in the eco-schools. Here's South Africa. We had a number of case studies from South Africa simply, I think, because we were based there and our students got so enthusiastic about this research program, I couldn't turn them back. So we just expanded the scope. Here's one in the toxic water pollution out of the mining environments up in the north of the country. And here's the student movements looking for African liberatory pedagogy and looking at what's happening in rising youth culture. So those are just some of the cases. That's not all of them by any means. But what I wanted to do here was really just share a few insights into this point about enabling transformation. So I think from our perspective and what we learned from this was the first and most important thing to do is to embrace diversity, not homogeneity. And we tend towards homogeneity because we are used to it, and it's kind of like our culture to try to be comfortable. And in fact, we have put ourselves out there and purposefully be uncomfortable. And we purposefully chose homogeneity over diversity. We purposely chose diversity over homogeneity, which is very difficult for a researcher, and especially comparative case research, because you tend to want to find things that are the same, not that are different. And then what do you do with things when they're so different? So it creates new challenges for researchers. And of course, it's important for partnership building across traditional boundaries and also for inclusion and for relationship building. And we also have to include linguistic diversity here, which is very difficult in scientific practice, as we know. We need to be able to confront contradictions and histories of exclusion honestly and with adequate depth analysis. And what we learned is that we actually don't have enough tools for this depth analysis. We tend to use quite simple concepts like drivers and such, which is actually inadequate for understanding what is actually going on there. We need to find opportunities for co-engaged changes and then expand these change potentials transformatively and transgressively as part of our research, not after the research. There's a tendency to do research and then want people to take it up afterwards. In fact, people need to be taking it up while the research is emerging. And that creates complexity also, and a type of reflexivity that we need in research. Here's some insights just around the T's that we were working with. One, transdisciplinarity is not a methodology. Okay, it tends to be seen very much like as if it's a methodology for science, but in fact it's something a lot more than a methodology. I think that's come up here this morning as well. What is the definition? And of course there isn't one, it's still an emerging concept. Transformation can become what we call an order word with little meaning, and to address that we need to constantly review this in different contexts and in relation to sustainability concerns within the scope of diversity that I was talking about earlier. We also need much more explicit emphasis on transgression. And by transgression, we mean transgressing the unsustainable, taking the taken for granted norms that hold this unsustainability in place. We need to transgress the practices and the habits that hold this unsustainability in place, and also the ongoing exclusions. So I think if we're more honest about what really needs to be done, then we will have to embrace notions of transgression much more explicitly. And then we should not take the power or process of T-learning or learning for granted. And in many contexts, people just assume that learning is going to happen. Learning actually needs to be supported, and quite explicitly so. And then lastly, some insights for policy and practice. I think they've come up already. But one of the things that I think we can do much better is to integrate science, arts, and societal perspectives. The arts is seem to be more important, but it seems a bit like a technology to help the scientists. But actually we need to get much more integrative with that body of work. It needs methodology development, it also needs research policy development, and especially around, we've heard already, the incentive system and measures of impact. The measures of impact are far too narrow for the kind of impact that we're talking about. And then also the time frames. We had 3 years in which to do this project. It's too big a challenge to actually really make the most of a project like this across so many countries, continents, in a 3-year period. So the time frames for this kind of research need to be extended. I want to also make a plea for the early career researchers. The early career researchers were so engaged with this type of research. It's incredible actually that it just fires them up. Especially the researchers in the Global South, they see something coming here that they really want to be part of. But the support for them also is inadequate, and especially proper funding, enough funding for postgraduate studies, for postdoctoral work, and for early professional development for students. So please, if we can appeal to the Belmont Forum, and especially for our researchers in the Global South. And then the last appeal that I want to make is one for more research on what this means for the education systems. You know that all of the world's young people are sitting in education systems, and these education systems are out of date. The way that teachers are teaching, the way that university professors are lecturing, the way that the colleges are structured, especially the vocational colleges, they are way out of date for the kind of challenges that we're facing, and yet this whole system is being neglected in the research arena. As we try to move, from the university to community, we forget the actual fundamental importance of the education system. So those are some of the areas that I just wanted to raise in terms of policy and practice. And then I wanted to just say thank you and happy birthday to the Belmont Forum. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And we've got one more talk to come before we have some questions. So can I also welcome Hassan Faraj?
Yeah, you don't
Can
need
start.
to talk from me. I'm not going to do that. It's 4 minutes before your bus and go to the train. All that noise that I make myself. This is what we are going to do. Everything that I needed to say, I will say. The question I wanted to ask you was, how many of you don't do capacity building? Could you raise your hand if you don't do capacity building? Take a look. Everybody, except one person. He's honest, by the way. The point is, everybody needs to do capacity building. I'm an old man. I've been involved in this business of capacity building for over 3 decades. And the issue of young science, early career scientists, people creating amphibians, science, technology, policy, the key type of people, etc., has been the bread and butter for the last 4 decades. What have I learned out of that? I've learned that it is really worthwhile for everybody to be involved in this business. And why is it worthwhile? Take a look around the world. We have this movement, right? The Greta Thunbergs of the world are wandering around. How many of them? Not just 1 or 2. Millions of them are around. They are the young future. They are 17 years from now. In 10 years' time, when Belmont Forum has done the next 10 years, they will be 27 years old. I'll be long gone, but they will be setting the course of the future, and they'll be solving the problems that my generation has created. We need to target our activities towards them and give them the way to really be better amphibians, science, policy, technology, amphibians. We need to really prepare the ground for them. How do we do that? Belmont Forum deals with complex systems problems. We need to now really think in terms of how do we do capacity building, not in just terms of developing human resource, but how do we take this human resource and teach them to think at systems level for solutions for problems. And therefore we need to focus a little bit on the issue of how do we do systems level capacity building. The other part of it is that I'm very fortunate in the last year to be a visiting professor in several universities in Japan, particularly in Hiroshima recently. And one of the things I wanted to do was to start something new. And so we started something called a network. Hiroshima is a university devoted to peace. And Hiroshima University recently has developed a strategic plan to do sustainability. Japan as a nation is deeply involved in the issue of sustainability and sustainable development. Taking those two things together, we formed a network for education and research for peace and sustainability. We started a model after the Stockholm Forum and the World Economic Forum, the Hiroshima Dialogue Forum on Sustainability and Peace. And we have initiated a proposal to Belmont Forum thinking about a new CRA, a new cooperative research program on the challenge of sustainability and peace in the global environmental change. The reason for that, doing that is to really engage multiple amounts of stakeholders across the sphere, not just one in the private sector or public sector or the NGO sectors. It's really important to do that to provide opportunities of a multiple kind to do capacity building, not just embedded in the proposals that are being submitted to the CRA. The other part of it is really this challenge that we have in terms of how do we sustain capacity in the long term. I'm a stakeholder. My generation really stood up the world. and left problems that the new generation has to solve. How do we then engage all these stakeholders and sustain them? What motivation can we provide them so that they can keep on doing things and own the knowledge that the research programs are generating, so this knowledge turns into action? Belmont Forum has supported something called the SUGI program, the Fuse for Food, Water, Energy in the urban context. Within that program, almost every project has something called urban living labs. These are living labs where stakeholders, including academics, come together and work together to think in terms of solving problems. We need to scale up such models over the next 10 years so that we truly have in our pocket nuggets of how we transform the society. That to me would be the true capacity building. And I'm very sorry that I brought you to your reception time. I wish this could have been more of a discussion because I wanted to go around and trust the microphone and say, here's what our capacity building. Maybe it will happen tomorrow.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have time for any questions or?
Looking to the organizers. Is it last time? Do we need to depart in 4:15? 15 minutes. Let's take it advantage.
Great. Well, I think everyone will agree we've got a really great panel here with some real diverse perspectives. So I'm going to open it up to some questions from the floor. And if you could introduce yourself and say where you're from, and in the interest of time, maybe which panel member you're directing your question towards.
Those glasses are tempting.
I always have a question. So I think from the presentation that I've heard here, I think one of the things that I'd like to get your reaction to this. So if Belmont Forum were to listen to the advice that was given in this panel, what I'm hearing is that we really need to think about how to more productively or more dramatically, larger scale, think about building the next generation. And how do we transform the science and to engage in actual true capacity building and skills development for transdisciplinary research. And so I'm thinking that we need to potentially start creating more training in educational parts of things, like a curricula, a series of workshops and networks to do these kinds of things, but to scale it, not just one-off. We need to make this a big part of what we do. And that's going to require partnerships, because not everybody in this room is going to be able to do that. And so I guess I just want your reactions to that kind of approach.
I think I agree with you 100%. We did a big research project across 12 Southern African countries, and we found very, very little support for academics and students to come into transdisciplinary research. But I also want to caution, I think we're not talking about the same kind of training that has been the norm in modern education institutional history. So it's a type of training that is engaged, and it therefore requires more engaged forms of learning by doing, as much as you need the concepts and so on to help you to advance quickly into the system of learning.
And I would just add to that, I completely agree, and I also think it takes new types of partnerships. Like there's both a scaling of the science partnerships that are in this room, scaling of the ambition of those partnerships, and I know that takes lots of work in home institutions, and also including more institutions within that, but it's also the type of institution, type of partnerships, because a lot of going science to action or engaged science or co-design actually steps out of the science world, right? And so if you're going to do really good narrative development based on science, you also need to find ways to support the narrative development. And many science organizations have trouble doing that with their own strictures and bounds, and that requires partnerships. And it also requires us to take seriously the lens through which other sectors see science, and being able to articulate why science-driven processes driven to those partnerships are so critical for decision making. Because I think when we turn the lens around and ask, how do other people see the use of science? There's actually sometimes within civil society and some other aspects, this sort of thought process that, oh, they're just going to take too long and be too slow, and they're going to just be mealy-mouthed about the answer. And that's a communication problem, and it's critical we solve it, so we build those partnerships, and it's a little bit of a circular thing. The partnerships help build a change in the thinking.
So this is going down a little bit of a different road. So I'm actually part of my department is actually multidisciplinary, and that's the focus. And those types of programs have actually increased, certainly within North America anyways. One of the challenges, I think this is being brought by other people, is even if you have that capacity, what comes next seems to be a major challenge. So whether it's places to publish your work, you know, I don't know that Belmont can actually solve these problems, right? But nonetheless, what one after your trade can do with that, I think that is an open challenge. Where do you publish your work? Do you have jobs afterwards? So this was brought up to me in the context of the Global South, where there's good training programs, and they put the government there puts lots of money in it, and that the people there are saying afterwards, I don't have a job. I'm expected to stay here and build capacity, but I actually can't. And so those types of challenges, I think, need to be considered.
Have we got any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Thank you, Maria, for that question. I know this was a loaded question. Belmont Forum is a collection of R&D agencies. Let's face it, folks, we support research. And yet there is the whole world of development assistance agencies that are 10 times bigger than we are. And I know that Maria and others have struggled, and Patrick and others have struggled to form the relationships between R&D agencies and the development assistance agencies, which is where the stakeholder communities get engaged, which is where the jobs creation happens, which is where the issue of making action really happens. We really need to do that somehow. So within the next few years, I hope we can really work together as a community so we can form a better set of partnerships within the Belmont Forum complex and grow this complex a little bit more to encompass from R&D into development assistance as well. This is going to be really a key for us. Thank you.
Question? Maria-Louisa?
Zambara from European Commission. It's comment like you, but on a different issue that I wanted to bring up. So you mentioned the issue, how to create a community of, researchers that work in a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary teams that are trained. Of course, training is important, but also I think it's something we are going to discuss in another session. It's also how we reward the rewarding system from academic work, and also the way publications are rewarded in the sense are acknowledged in the scientific community. So the open access, and this is where the funding agencies have to make a step forward in terms of valuing open access and rewarding open access. But I think there's a session on that, so I think we can come back to it.
Great, thanks very much, Maria-Louisa. So I'm not seeing anybody jumping up and down to ask another question, so I'll, in interest, oh, sorry.
Actually, it's not a question, it's just a comment. Maybe to have some light on the end of the tunnel, your question, Maria, into some of the previous comments about private sector. I was in a meeting about 2 weeks ago with a working group that will be planning a program for indigenous communities in Latin America to be funded by a private company. And the amazing thing, and I think it's a matter of leadership and a little bit of lobbying as well, is that this company that operates in several countries is going to make it mandatory a virtual training for all its employees concerning indigenous communities' culture and the threats to maintaining the heritage. And we are recommending that also if we could develop climate change or global change training, that would be very useful. So in this case, I think it's going to be, it's just 10,000 employees in one country, but it operates in 30 countries. If that becomes a trend, so in terms of partnerships with a private company, I think there will be a very impactful education resource. So I think that we have to continue, trying to develop those partnerships, whether it is public or private enterprises. But I think there are opportunities out there. We just have to offer and be able to produce the material that they may be in the need of. But I think that there are opportunities.
Great, thank you very much. So, I mean, most of the people in this room, but all of us here today, over the next week, the course of this week rather, we are going to be thinking about, what comes next for Belmont Forum in the next 10 years. And I think, through the discussion and the presentations that we've had on this afternoon, you've really sort of laid down the challenge in terms of where we need transformation. So we need transformation in research ecosystems. How do we reward science? How do we support project teams? How do we fund science? We need transformation in the way we do science out in the field in different contexts, not from the lab necessarily always. Transformation in career pathways, bringing the voice of the youth into the leadership forums and the decisions that we're making. Transformation in science communication and public engagement, how we talk to people, how we increase learning in the general population, and how we increase learning in society more broadly. And so I think really the challenge back to us now as Belmont Forum members, partner organisations, friends of Belmont Forum here today, is how do we, in looking at those challenges in transformation, work out the role that Belmont Forum plays in some or all of them, depending on what our ability is as different agencies, to go forward in the next 10 years. So thanks very much for people on the panel. Thank you all for your questions, comments from the audience, and I think we get to go drink and eat.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The time is currently 4:13. Our buses are waiting for us in front of this building. So we're going to make our way to Taipei 101, and I'm just going to add to the sense of urgency here. We're going to be approaching rush hour, but we'll make our way over, and we'll be going to the